Thanks, Zulema, and welcome everybody. It's great to be back. We did about a dozen of these in what we call our spring season, and now we're into our fall season. I want to introduce our guests, but I was just scanning through the RSVPs before the call, and it's truly impressive. There were nearly 500 of you, and any one of you could have been a guest on this call. So the first thing to do, as Zulema said, is introduce yourselves. And those of you who've been on these calls before, just put it in the chat, you know, obviously who you are, but maybe where you're coming in from, and something about, you know, catalytic climate capital, if that's relevant, and share your expertise with each other is the key thing on these calls. And I also want to bring in my colleague, Amy Cortese, who is our lead on all things climate. Hi, Amy.
Hi, everyone.
I'm getting ready to go to New York, actually, to join Amy for Climate Week next week. I'm sure many of you will be there as well. What are you hoping for from this call, Amy?
Well, first of all, your timing is perfect because we finally have beautiful fall weather. So thanks for bringing that. So we had a catalytic climate capital call back in April. And today we will continue our exploration of ways to scale up financing for climate adaptation and other stubborn gaps in climate finance.
So mapping opportunities for catalytic climate capital. If you're not in the right plane, as they say, that now's the time to get off. So let's just say hello to the folks that we've got. Donnel, I'm not sure Donnel is here yet, so we'll come back to him. But Jonathan Phillips from Duke, James E. Rogers Energy Access Project. Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, David. Good to be with you.
Great to be with you. I just want to say at the top, I had the privilege of serving on a nonprofit board with Jim Rogers, and he was a terrific fellow and a terrific leader in this space. So I love seeing his name on your title. And Ashish Kumar of the Shell Foundation, coming to us from London, I believe, right, Ashish?
Yeah. Hey, David, good to be here, and
Welcome.
I look forward to the conversation.
Great. We're delighted to have you. And Eric Berlow of Vibrant Data Labs. Actually, some of you saw him on that April call where we promised a climate finance tracker. I'm very proud to say that today, that climate finance tracker is live. Congratulations, Eric, and welcome to the call.
Thanks, David. Really excited.
We'll have a little demo and show off of this new feature in a couple minutes. Did I see Donnel come in? Donnel, tell me that you're here. All right. The show must go on. So the first thing I want to do before we get to our discussion is welcome and thank you, Debra Schwartz from the Catalytic Capital Consortium and the MacArthur Foundation, for starters, for sponsoring this call, but more to the point, for all your leadership on catalytic capital over the years. And welcome, Debra.
Thank you, David. It is so great to kick off the busy fall season with all of you and everyone from the ImpactAlpha team. We are just really excited that such a fantastic group and such a big group could come together to talk about this timely subject of how catalytic capital and climate finance and climate solutions need to come together. I will say, for my colleagues at MacArthur Foundation and myself, and especially John Balbach, who many of you know, we believe catalytic capital is vitally important to the climate work before us, and like never before. We also know that sustainable investments have a critical role to play. It's a both and, not an either or. And so we are, as always, grateful to David, to you and your team for helping frame out the conversation, but also creating space to dive deep, like we are today, into the catalytic capital end of the spectrum, and to bring so many great experts to the virtual table. We are particularly taking note, like so many, of the new IRA and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund in particular. It's a strong example in our mind of the way in which catalytic capital can come into the mix to enable the strong focus on the just transition and to ensure there's great connectivity between the work on climate and the existing community development finance infrastructure that we are so fortunate and proud to have in our country. So that's why I'm here. I am not the climate expert on our team. That would be John Baalbek. I know he's somewhere out there in the 500 pieces on the checkerboard. But again, David, we couldn't be more excited that you are able to bring us all together for these kinds of conversations. Huge thanks. And I know it's going to be a really fun time.
Only one question for you, Debra, which is we set out, and you've been on this for a long time, but we set out together to make catalytic capital cool. How are we doing?
You guys are, I don't know how the MacArthur Foundation is doing at that, but we know ImpactAlpha is crushing it. So we thank you. You guys do a fantastic job for the catalytic capital deals, especially, which can be wonky when we're into the blended finance space. But one thing that always really impresses me and always makes me feel grateful that you're out there, you make the deals accessible at a lot of different levels so people can understand, how in the end of the day, all of this work translates to impact for real people, for real places, for our planet. But we know you also enjoy unpacking all the wild financial pieces.
I wasn't fishing for a compliment, but thank you for that.
Okay, it is. So I don't know about cool, definitely wonky. I don't know.
And I will put in the chat the link to our conversation, our podcast that we did a while back.
Thank you. Thank you
get
so
a
much.
little more of that. So thank you, Debra, and thank you, C3. And we're going to make climate equity cool too as well. Okay, so let's jump right in. I'll give Donnel one more shot at kicking this off. He was in the New York Times this morning, if people saw that, with BlocPower's work on retrofitting buildings in New York, and maybe he's off putting in a heat pump somewhere. So maybe that's why he's not with us. So let's jump.
David, Donnel is on the call.
Okay.
There you go, Donnel. Show yourself.
Hey.
You're making me a little nervous there. Welcome, Donnel.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody's doing well. Excited about the conversation.
Congratulations on this piece that I read in the Times this morning. That I will say I made many of the same points that we made when we've tracked around with your team installing heat pumps. I think in a building in Brooklyn as well, or maybe that was Queens. I forget.
Well, you guys can. We'll definitely back you up if you say that ImpactAlpha scooped the New York Times. We'll back you up 100% on that. You guys are early and often with the great coverage of the stories that matter the most, including ours. So we really appreciate that and all the coverage you provide for the space. I mean, look, we think that what's going on in clean energy and climate justice right now is incredibly important. I'm in DC right now. We had the chance to meet with John Podesta yesterday, who's the new czar, if you will, in charge of climate and climate justice. And we got to grill him for an hour on what the plan is for climate justice. And they have plans. We were impressed with him. We were impressed with the president's comments. We were impressed with the various advocates and clean energy CEOs and investors who kind of gathered in DC to go to the White House yesterday and really start to really focus on celebrating where we are now and what's been accomplished. We're really starting to drill down into the details of what's going to come next and how we actually pull this off so that we can save the planet. And anything that we can do to be helpful, we want to do. So how can I help?
Well, I mean, maybe just drill down a little bit in what you learned, yesterday and in other places about how to take advantage of this. I think you're calling it a once in a life opportunity and this historic moment, and in particular, where catalytic investors, and I would say that includes both public and private investors, but where, sort of the money that makes the deals work can play.
Yeah. It was interesting. I mean, we had a meeting yesterday with Podesta and Ali Zayed, and the CEO of Sunrun and CEO of Fervo Energy, which is a geothermal company. Sunrun is, of course, a publicly traded clean energy solar installer. and several other CEOs. John Doerr was there. Nat Simons and his partner were there. I didn't catch her name, but I mean, she's way smarter than he is, from what I can tell. So I wish I had. And Tom Steyer, and had a really robust conversation about what's in the bill, what's missing, what kind of rules need to be put in place, which departments are in play to receive massive amounts of funding. Do they have the personnel and policies and procedures that they need in those departments? How do we prevent the DC thing where they just kind of get the money out the door to the state and kind of wash their hands of the whole thing and move on to the next policy? How do we make sure that the federal government continues to be involved in the implementation over the next few years? Because that's what's going to be needed to serve communities. I think federal government handing off the baton, right? Which is an interesting framework and probably right. The question is, when you think about financially underserved communities, which by definition are not very well served by business as usual, when that baton gets handed off for $400 billion from the federal government to the states and to the private sector, how do we make sure that the communities that are underserved participate? Not because we're good liberals and we're progressives and we're good people and we have a conscience, but because poor people in urban environments and working people, that's where all the greenhouse gas emissions are, right? Like 67% of the emissions in New York City are from the buildings. Most of those buildings are in the outer boroughs. And you just can't reduce greenhouse gas emissions in America without a significant investment in communities of color, working class white communities that again are by definition underserved. So what kind of changes need to be made in the federal code, at the departments, by the White House, in order to ensure that the capital makes its way to the communities that need it the most? And then second, yeah, it's $370 billion or whatever it is. That's fantastic. I mean, just our sector alone, buildings in America, is north of $3 trillion that needs to be invested. Transportation is a separate category, agriculture, heavy industry, steel making, electric vehicle charging infrastructure. These are $1 trillion opportunities in markets. And so catalytic capital is critical. And part of what we got to do is advise the federal government on the shape and format of their climate policy investments so that it can most efficiently catalyze additional private sector investment. And I do think there is a significant role for real impact investment capital that is willing, to take a risk-adjusted return in exchange for real impact on health, on greenhouse gas emissions reductions, CO2 reductions, job creation. There is a real role in a mezzanine project finance stack of an infrastructure project or a green infrastructure project in a low-income community. That's going to be there, it's a massive opportunity for the impact investment community to really step up. Those would be my initial thoughts. Is that helpful?
That is, but you raised some great questions, and I wanted to press you on some of the answers, in particular, how to make sure that money and those projects do go to underserved areas and underserved communities that, as you say, are not in the normal business as usual. So what are a couple markers or a couple strategies to make sure that happens?
Well, we at BlocPower got a call about 13 months ago from the Environmental Protection Agency that has been primarily responsible for engaging communities in need of environmental justice and climate justice primarily. And they have a database of all the zip codes and census tracts in America where communities need environmental justice. So that's one. What we've done is we got a grant from Jeff Bezos to kind of build a data model of all the buildings in America, and therefore all the buildings in America that are in communities that the EPA defines as a community in need of environmental justice. And we're starting to build financial and environmental and social impact models of the impact, the health impact, the financial returns, the climate impact of various kinds of investments in green infrastructure in these financially underserved communities. And we hope that that open source data platform, which we're building out on our nonprofit arm side and donating to everybody, can serve as a central clearinghouse for universities, for policymakers, for mayors, to look at the data and hold themselves and the federal government and impact investors accountable around whether or not the investments that we're all making are catalytic, and more importantly, are they going to unlock the massive reductions in greenhouse gas emissions that we need to survive as a society, and that we're totally capable of with the technology we have on hand. So we are laser focused on building a predictive model of climate justice infrastructure across America that would allow impact investors, federal policymakers, mayors, governors, whoever, environmental justice organizations, nonprofits, and university students, and high school students, and churches and synagogues and mosques, whoever, to really dig in and figure out and discover for themselves what kind of climate justice investments make sense, so that there can be a layer of accountability over what's going to happen even before it happens.
Yeah,
that's how we think about that.
That's a theme that'll come up too, I think, with Ashish and Jonathan. But Donnel, you had a big announcement yesterday. Do you want to tell us about the Upside Tech Alliance? It's with a few other companies that I think ImpactAlpha readers know well: Bitwise, Aclima, and Promise, and of course all K-Port Capital portfolio companies, which we also know very well. So tell us what that's all about and what problem you're solving there.
I mean, it's as simple as, thank you for the question. For us, it's as simple as, this is a once in a generational opportunity in the form of the climate bill, in the form of the willingness and the intentionality of impact investors to do something serious about wealth inequality and social justice and climate change. And if you believe what I just said, that it's a once in a generational impact, then you got to respond, not with the same old stuff. It's kind of individualistic. My company wins, your company loses, your investors win, mine lose, whatever. But can you really focus on that African proverb? If you want to go fast, you go by yourself. If you want to go far, you go together. We got together as a group of K-Port Capital startups. We think K-Port Capital is the greatest impact investor in the history of humankind. And so the four of us as K-Port Capital portfolio companies got together and decided we want to go fast and we wanted to go far. And it's taken some work, but we built an Upside technology coalition to help advise mayors and governors and the federal government in philanthropy and impact investors and family offices who care about the planet on what kind of investments would make sense and how our products and services and our technology platforms could more quickly facilitate the kinds of impact that I know folks in your community care about. So we're really proud of this alliance. It's a lot of fun. It's also super educational for me as a CEO Bitwise is an incredible company. Aclima, incredible company. Promise Pay, amazing. The things that they do are all amazing. Their products are amazing. Their services are amazing. Their teams are amazing. But the founders are incredible. And to have the opportunity to work side by side in the trenches in a once in a lifetime opportunity to create impact for the communities that we care about as founders of color from Latinx backgrounds, Black American backgrounds is really special. And we were delighted to share the news with everyone about our launch on that front yesterday.
Fantastic. Congratulations. Let's go to a sort of the global situation and bring in Jonathan Phillips from Duke, because there's obviously a dimension here that goes beyond just the US, and I want you to sort of tell us about what you're seeing on the thorny questions of adaptation and project finance, and particularly in emerging and frontier markets. I want to get to your, emerging 15, but maybe you want to give us the broad sweep. Is there the same energy that we are now, that Donnel was describing in the US or around the rest of the world?
Well, Donnell's got a lot of energy. I'm not sure we're totally on the same wavelength. The IRA was an amazing bill. I mean, I worked on the last time Congress took a run at this in 2009, and it's a completely different approach, and it's going to put the US in a strong leadership position, but it's a very US centered bill. And I think it's going to have knock-on effects in terms of diversified supply chains and lowering technology costs that are going to be great for emerging markets. In some respects, I think it might be tougher for them to generate the manufacturing and some of the jobs that they would love to see that come along with a low carbon transition. But there are, there's a lot of other reasons to be excited.
Tougher because of the Made in America provisions that will disadvantage them.
Right. I think to the extent that the US wants to engage in partnerships in developing the minerals and kind of the deeper supply chains that go into solar panels and batteries, et cetera, there's an opportunity for countries to participate in that. But the idea that countries are going to become, the next China of manufacturing some of these end products, I think, runs counter to the IRA. I think the U.S. makes a strong statement that we want those jobs. We want to build those supply chains domestically. So I think that's a mixed bag for some folks in developing markets. Lot to be excited about in terms of Egypt hosting COP here and really focusing on adaptation for one, as you mentioned, but also the role of partnership here, the role of public institutions, Western governments, advanced countries in general, getting involved in really de-risking these markets where, and it's not like what Donnel just described where the private sector has lots of opportunities. Some of these markets are reliant on 90% of climate capital coming from public institutions, especially foreign public institutions. So the more that we can, shift multilateral development banks and DFIs to really focusing like laser beams on getting the private sector involved in these markets, whether that's through, de-risking facilities like you just talked about, like blended capital, or, building on what we did at COP26 around carbon markets and making these changes something that you can build development gains around in addition to carbon gains. Helping countries prioritize and enabling environment reforms. I think governments hear constantly the litany of policy changes that are needed. But I think the more that we can align specific policy changes with bankable projects and real investment that could come along with those policy changes, the more we'll start seeing and knowledge. I think a lot of your investors on this call, it's hard for them to get intelligence about some of those markets that they'd maybe like to play in, but some of these international institutions like the World Bank have phenomenal knowledge resources and understanding of these markets that I think really that needs to be part of a full mobilization agenda to kind of partner with the private sector.
Let's just pause and put a marker down on adaptation that you mentioned. And as folks probably know by now, it's generally gotten short shrift compared to mitigation, partly, as you said, bankability of projects, partly measurement of, it's relatively easy, not easy, but relatively easy to measure carbon output as opposed to sort of some of the slightly fuzzier benefits of adaptation investment. But on the other hand, adaptation is what goes to ground in real lives and real communities, and as these climate impacts start to hit. Certainly everybody's been seeing that in the last few months. So what is the sort of way to think about adaptation financing?
I don't want to steal Ashish's thunder, but I'm going to tease a project that we're actually working on together a little bit. I want to talk about the agriculture sector, and I think it's a sector where you can really see how adaptation and development converge. Projects and technologies that reduce things like post-harvest loss or reduce the risk of crop failure. Think of like cold storage technologies or irrigation. They directly reduce exposure to climate risks, right? They are adaptation. And they're also big winners from a development perspective. And now if we enable those technologies using solar instead of diesel, then we're also talking about mitigation benefits there too. And this is low carbon development. We need to stop talking about kind of mitigation solutions in places in the world where there's just very little carbon emissions happening, and frame it in a way that I think it is more acceptable for countries and something that they can really get behind. And that's low carbon development. So you know, there's all sorts of other outcomes that we can talk about with this technology, like higher yields and higher quality produce and gender empowerment, increased bargaining power for farmers. Those things get increasingly tricky to measure. And part of what we're working on with the Shell Foundation is, can we do a better job of quantifying some of those benefits so that we can start thinking of adaptation projects more along the lines of how we think about, you know, public infrastructure, where, you know, there are public gains to be realized with these business models. And just the way that infrastructure investment here shortens commute times for everybody, lowers the cost of products because they can get shipped quicker and easier. We have those same types of benefits that come along with adaptation projects, but we do a really bad job of estimating what those benefits are. And it's hard to get public investment behind those investments, or public investment behind those types of projects if we can't do that. So the idea here is, can we get a better, more robust data environment so that you can put public money together with private money? Because again, there's plenty of money to be made. There are financial returns associated with adaptation related approaches, but combining those pools of finance is a lot easier to do if we've got a better handle on kind of impacts and the data that goes along with it.
I love all this focus on data, and we're going to get to Eric and the map in a minute. And I do want to bring in Ashish, but last question for you, Jonathan, is just the emerging 15. And I think that's going to be a theme that people are going to hear more about in terms of sort of heading off a kind of, I guess, coal, just to put it bluntly, coal lock-in. So just tell us briefly about what that's about.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll throw a report into the chat here for folks that want to learn more about this. But, you know, if we look beyond the OECD, beyond the BRIC countries, and we look to sort of the top 15 emitters after that, you know, Egypt, Indonesia, South Africa, Thailand, Turkey, you know, these are countries that over the next 20 years are collectively on track to grow their emissions at the level China has done the last 20 years. This makes, you know, 2 degrees C, 1.5 degrees C goals impossible. So, you know, these are countries whose time has come. Their populations are young and they're growing rapidly, but they're also poor and they're being ravaged by climate change now. And they don't have the resources to, you know, crank up the AC and build seawalls. So it's really critical that advanced economies partner here on financing. I think there's this notion that the technology ferry is going to make low carbon development a reality. And maybe it will over a long enough time horizon, but, you know, I think there really needs to be some partnership to accelerate this transition. And I think we saw, you know, a glimmer of this at COP26 last year with this announcement of the US, along with European allies, partnering with South Africa, you know, on an $8.5 billion financing package to get South Africa off coal. And it's called a Just Transition Partnership, but I think this model is going to encounter, it's promising, it's got a lot of momentum, but if we want to replicate it in Indonesia, Vietnam, other places, we're going to have to really dig into like identifying what a just transition means locally and what the priorities are for these countries, because it needs that level of local legitimacy in order for it to really have wings, and I think for capital, for commitments to turn into actual investments.
Jonathan, that's a great segue to Ashish. I know you two work together closely, and you know, Shell Foundation has been working on a lot of these same themes and projects. But first, Ashish, tell us about the Shell Foundation, because I, for one, was not familiar. I had no idea you had been at this for 20 years and your kind of whole story there. So maybe tell us a little bit about Shell Foundation first, and then we can, move on to adaptation pathways and some of the things you're working on.
Sure. Thanks, Amy, and thanks for this opportunity. So Shell Foundation, we are a UK-registered charity. We're an independent venture philanthropic arm set up by Shell Corporate, but we work at an arm's length distance, and we have co-funding partnerships with FCDO, UK8, and USAID, and a bunch of other, MOU partnership with DFIs and institutional investors. Our goal is to catalyze, energy access SDG7 based solutions, which are either direct solutions, or we back blended finance vehicles, or create market mechanisms for, across Africa and India. We have been doing blended finance sort of stuff for quite a while, I would say, even before the term got mainstream. So it's glad to see how this is getting more mainstream in the realm of patient capital, and trying to attract both developmental finance and institutional capital as well.
I know this is what Jonathan didn't want to steal your thunder on, because I think you're both working together on these adaptation investment pathways, which gets very practical around solar irrigation and cold storage and very, very practical things that people can get behind. So can you just give us a taste of that?
Yeah, so essentially, as just building on what Jonathan shared, I think last year we collaborated towards a research piece, which we can call like a phase 1, where we identify around 13 recommendations of clear interventions that can be done through donors, government agencies, private sector, private financiers, and now trying to build a more robust framework of, data and evidence, and which includes a set of metrics that can be taken forward as pathways for, measuring adaptation impact for these specific value chains. I think based on that work, what we're trying to right now do is map out a number of vehicles that are already out there, which are led by either private sector or development financiers in these, not just in these value chains, but across the sectors that we care for, and then see if there's any one of those vehicles that we can come in and back materially as well. I'm happy to build on some of the metrics that I have seen, or solutions that I'm observing, which could be relevant for the audience here.
Sure. And then also, as you said, there are some initiatives to try to blend capital, as you say, to make some of these things happen. And maybe you can share some of those things too. I think you might. I don't know whether you were going to. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you were going to see whether you could give us some actual news.
Yeah. So I think in terms of let me start with the matrix that I find are very tangible and has been executed and implemented by some of the existing, let's say, private sector players. So there's the one I'm aware of is Omnivore, which is an ag tech specialist VC in India. They have, they're on their third fund, raising 130 million. But they already have a number of adaptation focused metrics, around reduced water consumption, absorptive and adaptive capacity, around increased access to credit or increased access to insurance, towards measuring resilience. And they've been doing it actively. And the key thing to highlight there is we are talking about mainstream smallholder farmer here being served by the portfolio by a commercial VC. It's not like they're talking only to we're only talking about serving the commercial farmers out there. And that is broadly happening in the ag tech in India, at least, around unlocking of pure early stage commercial VC based funding for the entire sector, for the at least 70-80% of the smallholders. So that's one example of a setup already doing or measuring adaptation impact. In terms of the new activity, I can definitely mention one of them. There's a global alternative asset manager called TKHU Capital. I don't know if you guys have come across them. So TKHU has recently launched a $1 billion euro regenerative ag, climate resilient and regenerative ag fund, which has a backing of their own 100 million euro balance sheet, funding, then Unilever coming in for another 100 million, and AXA. They already have, a 300 million sort of commitment, and now they are getting close to their first close. The key thing to know there is, although they have a global focus, both global north and global south, the kind of financing it can unlock, especially for scaled up solution, could be quite a pull or an anchor for a number of early stage solutions. They are looking at across climate resilient solutions. So we're talking about soil health solution, or regenerative ingredients, or digital agronomy. So I believe these kind of vehicles could be quite sort of sending the right market signal that we have not seen in the past. So that's just one example.
I think you heard it here first, right? Because we were trying to tease that out of you the other day, and we didn't know who the players were. So that's, I think, real news. And stick around, Ashish, and everybody. But the focus on data is a perfect way to bring in Eric Berlow and the new climate finance tracker that Vibrant Data Labs has developed, and which is now live on ImpactAlpha, which is trying to give a view of some of this data. Eric, do you want to? I know you want to actually maybe show some slides, but
yeah, for sure. No, thanks for
what's up?
including me here. And I know some of you were on that last call where we did a little sneak preview of the prototype, and so we're launching it live today. And I'm going to just give a quick walkthrough to show a few use cases, what it is, what it's not, and then we'll jump to it live in case people have questions. But so I'm just going to share my screen for a sec, and that work. You see a mountain?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Oh shoot, wait, that's not what I want to do. There we go. Okay, got it. So the idea here is that, as you all know, in the next decade, trillions of dollars of investment decisions will be made in climate solutions. And to help those decisions be better informed, there are a lot of efforts to track the data on climate finance, like Climate Policy Initiative is one. And the common approach is to track these like flows of money to broad sectors. And sometimes mitigation or adaptation or energy, food, water, whatever. And sometimes individual investments don't fall neatly into one bucket, like solar powered water pumps for irrigation, water, agriculture, adaptation, and mitigation. So to complement these efforts, what we are doing is building a tracker that tracks flows of money to mitigation and adaptation efforts on the ground, like actual investments to doers on the ground. And right now we're starting with the US in this prototype, this beta now, where we've partnered with Crunchbase for investment data and Candid for philanthropic grants. These are all private investments and grants, not a lot of government data in here, where we searched their databases for any investments or grants that mention climate relevant terms in their profiles. And just to kind of back out on that or drill into it, these search terms spanned a wide range of climate mitigation and adaptation topics, which we gleaned from all sorts of climate reports and websites like Project Drawdown, Regeneration, Climate Tech VC, the CPI reports, IDFC, et cetera, and scanning hundreds of Wikipedia pages that mentioned climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. With this search, we found over 6,000 US-based companies and nonprofits that received over 230 billion in private investments and grants in the past 5 years. Then what we did was, for every one of these entities, organizations, we got their descriptions from Crunchbase or Candid, and then we also went to LinkedIn, got their LinkedIn descriptions, but what they do, as well as how they describe themselves on their website, and then partnered with a machine learning company called Primer to a natural language processing company to machine read all of that text and auto-generate a custom taxonomy of climate keywords to tag them all up with things like battery, energy efficiency, storage, etc. Once we have those keywords, then it allows us to let those organizations self-organize into clusters, into themes like renewable energy, electric vehicles, or natural disasters. And so where each of these bubbles is a theme that comes from the data. And just to kind of do a little instant replay on how that works schematically is we take every organization, they get tagged with a keyword signature related to climate. Similar organizations are linked if they share a lot of keywords in common. And then that generates a network of organizations that are linked if they're similar. Once I'm a network scientist, ecologist, so once the network we're off and running, where we can use network theory and machine learning to let the links act like springs and pull similar organizations together, and then let them automatically organize themselves into groups that are auto-labeled by the most commonly shared keywords in the cluster. Okay, so that's kind of the method behind it. What that means is that we get this thematic distillation of where the money's flowing, not by what the funders say they're doing or predefined categories, but bottom up from the data, from the language of how the investees and grantees on the ground describe what they do. And it's impossible to see this with just the naked brain scanning 6,000 company descriptions. In addition to providing this big picture view, we created an interface that's designed for discovery. So, for example, if I was interested in investing in regenerative agriculture for soil carbon sequestration, I could ask who's already funding what in this area. And I could do that by literally just searching the keywords for regenerative agriculture, soil carbon, and quickly find that there are 100, sorry, I'm getting a little, I see. Every time somebody says it wants to admit, it's a break in my presentation. So I could find really quickly that there are 97 companies and nonprofits that mention those terms. Then we can easily subset of those. There's 35 that are venture backed, drill into the details of them, see them all as a list to see what they're doing. We could also ask, who should I talk to? And in that case, we might want to summarize that set of 35 and see who are all the top investors in that area. There's 89 of them that you might want to talk to for leads or diligence. We could also ask, who should I convene? We might want to start with these investors, and also we've summarized all the founders of those 35 companies. Or you could undo that last selection of just venture-backed ones and get all the nonprofits as well, and incorporate in the conversation also the philanthropic donors and the executives of those nonprofits, to have a broader dialogue about the future of regenerative agriculture. So finally, if you wanted to look, if you're interested in one particular investor in that group, like Breakthrough Energy, you could step back and look at all of their investments. Here, there's 40 investees in the map, and ask who else did they fund and browse them. Or you could summarize them and say, well, who co-invested with them? And then see with Breakthrough Energy, there's 300 other co-investors to just understand what's that co-investing landscape. So those are just some queryable kind of, how to query the data tools. But a unique aspect of this map is that it blends both investment data and grant data. So for every one of these bubbles, we could color them but we could look at what kind of money is going where and where are the gaps. So we could color every bubble by the fraction of companies within that are venture backed. So the more red, the more venture backed. And even just drag the slider on those to see where are the hotspots of venture-backed themes. We can see here the concentration of them in electric vehicles, batteries, renewables, plant-based diets, and ag tech. And if we then we could sort all those bubbles so that horizontally they're sorted by the fraction of venture-backed companies within, more venture-backed companies to the right, and vertically by whether or not they explicitly mention equity terms in their descriptions. The fraction of companies that do, And here we're tracking, again, just from the language, over 150 climate equity terms, from poverty and inequality to low income, energy security, forced migration, displacement, et cetera. And now we see these striking gaps in the funding, especially in ventures. So for example, this upper right corner is empty, which means that most of the venture tends to go to climate tech. It does not explicitly mention climate equity. Now, that's probably not news to many of us, but the value of a trend is that also you can identify the outliers. So here we could subset the renewable energy outliers that explicitly mention making energy accessible to the poor. Similarly, second, another big gap that pops out is that in the lower left, we see grant-funded nature-based solutions that typically focus on biodiversity conservation and restoration that actually don't often address at the same time poverty and low-income livelihoods. And so that's a gap. And again, we could find these climate equity outliers in nature conservation that focus on low-income livelihoods as examples to learn from. Finally, the third gap that's interesting here that I thought was that if you look in the upper part here, upper left, there's a whole area around equitable regenerative food systems that's still kind of nudged to the left that seems to be a little too early for venture, where there's not clear, simple investable business models. So these, but there's a few outliers, of course, as well against the positive deviance that we could look to for examples. So these three main climate equity gaps that just kind of pop from here in the data are also three huge opportunities. The first of which is just that are for alternative capital to help them. One is to help scale the climate tech to everybody, basically scale renewable energy access, which we talked about earlier. The second is to scale nature protection and restoration by simultaneously supporting low-income livelihoods on the ground, because a lot of them fail otherwise. I'm an ecologist, so I know about how that doesn't work. And finally, to provide support to equitable regenerative food system solutions to help them develop more investment-ready business models. So those are three main opportunities that kind of pop from the data. So generally, just stepping back, the way that we're thinking about it is that this climate crisis is an all hands on deck problem. And what we're trying to do with this tracker is to help all the hands see what the others are doing, just to make it transparent. And also to help all the hands just see the big picture, because everybody's working independently in their own silos. We also want to help people just through the querying tool, just quickly be able to ask who's doing what, who should I talk to, who should I convene, who co-funded with whom, where are the gaps and where are the outliers. And so I also want to just stress what this is not. This is a map. It's a simple base map of who's funding what. It's not a mountain guide. In other words, a map can't tell us where to go, but without a map, we're lost. So we're just trying to provide that base layer to help everybody to see what's going on. This is what's hopefully next in line. Again, we're just focused on the US right now, but we're trying to expand geographically, expand funding types to include public sector research kind of funding, and also improve the interface to expand the reach and empower storytellers, et cetera. So that's where we're going. And here's a bunch of people who've helped out so far. So yeah, if you want from that, we can, it's live here at cft-us impactalpha.com that you can access from that landing page. And here's sort of like more the full interactive thing. So I'll just leave it at that, because I just wanted to get through that quickly so that we could have time for questions.
And yeah, there were a couple of questions in the chat, Eric.
Yeah.
Are you including project finance and debt? And also the US funders, are they also working internationally? And would that be included?
Yeah, that's good. Well, for the latter, again, for the data are all from Candid, which is philanthropic grants that are reported in 990s and in the news, et cetera. And Crunchbase, which is mostly private investments. And so there's not a lot of like government finance. There is some, like if you look here, is the National Science Foundation, but generally it's mostly private investors. right now, this is all just US based organizations, but we did, through natural language processing, search through their descriptions to see if they mention any other geographic place names. So even if they're based in the US, I think if you look, there's some here that also work in Africa that are based in the US, right? And so we have that in there as well, but they're not, where we could glean it from the description. So that's under geotags here, which is different than up here. We've got their company, city, and headquarters, state and city where they're based. The vast majority of California, New York. But if you flip it to the geographic view, you can see they're in all 50 states. Yeah.
We're heading up on the hour. I think we will probably run over. Obviously, if you have to leave, do so. But I think we want to keep the room open for some conversation. So we'll probably run over. Just giving you that 5-minute warning now. We're going to open it up to questions, but there's a few people that I asked to kind of come on just to share some thoughts. One is Taj Eldridge, because one of the gaps in this whole climate world is actually the talent and the workforce to make it so. And Taj has been working heavily on that. So I just wanted to bring you up, Taj, and have you say a little bit about that and Crest and whatever else you got on your mind.
Definitely. Thank you, David, and thank you, ImpactAlpha, and phenomenal, that climate finance tracker. I'm loving it. I was off camera really looking into it, so thank you for that. Can't wait till it has an international focus as well, as mentioned. But as an investor, in the climate space, as a fund-to-fund investor, we started seeing a problem early on that as we were providing this capital to these companies and to these funds, do we have enough talent that's readily available to work at these companies that we're providing funding to? Do we have enough talent that's prepared and that has the knowledge about it as well? So I'm proud that Ares Charitable Foundation provided a $25 million grant to JFF, Jobs for the Future, in DC and Boston, as well as WRI, to promote in India, to really kind of get this intersection of climate and workforce. So it's a 5-year grant that we're going to do. And the whole purpose is really twofold. Number one, to help create 25,000 jobs around climate resiliency and green jobs. And then number two, to ensure that 100,000 more people know about these jobs. So for me, what that means talking about this idea of climate in places that we have not talked about before. And I think that's been an issue historically, in my opinion, about this idea, because we have to build a big tent strategy. And doing so, we have to be where the people are at. TikTok, Instagram, movie studios, podcasts, all these other things that we can communicate to the public and the future public about these opportunities around workforce and climate.
Great. We have another person tuning in. I hope Lynn Heller, are you here? She was maybe in between meetings in her car, but
Hi.
Hi,
Can you hear me?
yes.
Sorry, yeah, I'm driving. Thank you for asking me to join. Yeah, I don't know if you wanted me to just talk a little bit about the project that I am developing in East Baltimore and how the Inflation Reduction Act could help. Will help with our project economics. Would that be interesting?
Exactly. So Lynn is with the Climate Access Fund in Baltimore, doing community scale solar across Maryland, having a hard time making some of these things pencil out. And the IRA has been a huge help. So yeah, tell us about that, Lynn.
Sure, yeah. So we are the Climate Access Fund is a nonprofit green bank that is focused we're an unusual green bank in that we are focused exclusively on helping one market get off the ground, and that is low-income community solar in Maryland. And so we're a very sort of niche green bank. We are also a solar developer because we are about plugging gaps in the market, and we noticed that no developers were actually developing projects below 1 megawatt located in underserved communities. and for the benefit of underserved communities. So we have a pilot project we are developing on the rooftop of a school in East Baltimore that will serve about 175 low-income families in East Baltimore. It'll save them 25% on their electricity bills. And we're also offering shared ownership of the solar asset itself. Each piece of the capital stack has been a challenge. Using traditional solar investment tools and traditional solar finance, we had gone to a couple of high net worth individuals for the tax equity portion because no institutional tax equity investor wants to do below 1 megawatt project. The direct pay option of the Inflation Reduction Act now is allowing us to own the project, thereby being able to avoid having to pay tens of thousands of dollars in transaction costs for traditional tax equity. So that is only one way in which the IRA is really helping us to create hopefully a replicable model of truly community-based, very low-income benefiting community solar projects. And I will stop. And there is a job training component, a workforce development component, and also an after-school program at the school. So it's a really comprehensive kind of approach.
That's
I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a terrific example. And I just want to encourage everybody here, as you get into these very granular, very practical solutions, as Debra said, we love these wonky capital stacks. And if you're finding ways to make deals work and projects work, and particularly, in new ways that, that some of this public financing is helping, please send us those examples. I wanted to, at the top of the hour, Debra, I don't know if you're still here, but if you wanted to just sort of close out this first portion, and then we'll keep the room open, as I said, but just any thoughts about what this all suggests for catalytic capital. And then Ashish, I do want to bring you back because I think you have a couple more examples, but Debra, if you're still there, good.
I'm here. Just fantastic. I think might be better to ask my colleague, John Balback, because I think he has some of the deeper backstory.
Bring him up as well. John, are you
so John, are you on the screen? I think he's there somewhere.
If you don't put your video on, then you fall back to screen 7 or so.
And if you're like me, you can't get your cursor to be in the right place at the right time. But David, I would just say, we really just appreciate you bringing everybody together. The finance tracker is fascinating, and the chat reflects that. And while there's always going to be more iterations and further ways to tweak and strengthen that tool, as someone who was working on energy efficiency finance solutions probably about 12 years ago, we would have loved to have had a tool like that. It would have made our work in terms of trying to find the gaps, trying to find the partners, the co-investors, the models, and to be able to just practically be on the ground doing the work. That kind of information, even if it's not perfect, is just extraordinary. It's a springboard. So thank you.
Terrific. Like I say, we're going to just keep it open, and eventually we'll just sort of devolve into open conversation. But Ashish, I know we were moving along there, so I think I cut off a few of your good examples of adaptation pathways. So please share.
Yeah, thanks, David. Very quickly. So I'll just encourage everyone to stay tuned. I think other than the one I mentioned, which was already kind of in the public domain by Tikahu, there's 2 other very large scale, purely private sector led adaptation finance vehicles or platforms being in design and, soon to be launched as soon as maybe by the COP. And that is all focused on, pure emerging market adaptation impact, and led by, private sector institutionals. So obviously I can't name them at the moment, but I just wanted to provide a bit of teaser that,
that's what I was fishing for. We did know about Tikahu, but I was trying to fish for the new one, but we'll find it. We'll find out.
Yeah. And beyond that, I think there are vehicles like Agri 3 Fund which is by Cardano and FMO, and it's again a blended finance vehicle where they're trying to do credit enhancement with the local banks and the local financial institutions across the global south in some sustainable ag value chain, which I find is quite innovative in terms of making more bankable projects, bringing more bankable projects to the market, just as Jonathan was highlighting earlier. So Agri3 is one, by Rabobank is another one. So yeah, just mention. Great. And Jonathan or Donnel, I don't know if Donnel is still with us, but if there's any sort of final thoughts, and then we'll just really open it up to broad Q&A, and I'll try to take a step back.
Nothing on my end, David. Fine to open it up.
And Donnel may have jumped. Excuse me?
Or Taj.
Final thoughts. I know that people want to talk about the map. It's a testament, Eric, to the power of it, that it tends to captivate people's imagination. So we can open it up to that. And Yangbo, you had a good comment. Somebody said this isn't all really climate. There's lots of other themes there, but climate, as the questioner said, does seem to be the hot topic, and it does encompass a lot of these things. I mean, the line is, everybody's a climate investor now.
Well, exactly, and where sometimes I find some resistance is, and actually several fronts. So first is there is so much of this either or type of thinking as far as, well, not just climate, but name any of the SDGs, that trade-offs, and of course they exist. However, if you design mechanisms in certain ways, you can design them in ways that accentuate and enhance outcomes on all, or you can do it that actually clash with each other. It really depends on mechanism design there. So really the question is really, how do we really hammer in the messaging that this is not about trading off like either or, but it's rather a both and situation. That's number one. And then on a related note that came up early in the chat, because some have brought up adaptation, and personally I've had to push back quite a few times, actually very recently, against some of those who were basically acting like basically they were trying to plan for 6-degree temperature rise, in which half the world's population will be forced to migrate under that scenario, and even a 2-degree might force 10% of the world's population to migrate, like those types of situations. So pushing back against those connotation of adaptation, about how it's not like we're giving up on mitigation, but rather it's something that would improve the efficacy of efforts to mitigate by making mitigation more equitable, to say the least. So just want some comments on these points.
Thank you for that. That's a very important point.
Yeah, David, if I could, I would like to add to that. And for those who may be going to the Smart City Conference, I'm actually heading out and going to Miami if you're seeing that. But I think for me, we need to talk about the climate issue differently. When we talk about, my PhD is in economics, I love numbers, I understand it, but we have to talk about it where it is palatable for the people so they can support it. When we talk about it from a standpoint of degree changes, people are dealing with real life issues today. They can't think about 20 years from now. So when I talk about climate as a public health issue, I'm talking about people who may have asthma, they're living next to off-ramps, they have ICEs, they're coming down. I'm talking about people who have heat-related illnesses that are coming from all of these things that are happening. I'm talking about the people of Jackson, Mississippi, who are going through what they're going through because of the cresting of the Pearl River, because of the flooding. I'm talking about myself, who has kidney failure from environmental racism. And so when we talk about it from that standpoint of public health, a different conversation. That's what I call the Catholic way of providing guilt. The other way for that too is to do about the positive way. The positive way for me is economic mobility. And that's why I'm working what I'm doing with JFF and the CREST program. We can't just badger people and say, do this, do this, do this, or the evil will happen. We also have to provide carrots. And the carrots is we can reduce the racial wealth gap. We can really kind of make an economic story around clean energy, climate, and the jobs that are being created there. And then lastly, a mix, what I kind of call the mix of positive and a negative, is the social impact. I think somebody said it here before that the communities that are most impacted are the communities that are providing the least and greenhouse gas emissions from products and services and what they're doing. And so I think if we talk about climate, if we talk about the investments that we make in a different way, we would have more people around us and with us to support this, and we have a more robust policies that can also have a Jedi lens with it as well. So that just kind of my comments and the way we think about it in this space.
Yeah, Ashish, Eric, or Jonathan?
Well, I wanted to comment on Taj's very good comments. It kind of gets to, I mean, I love what the Biden administration is doing with this modern supply side economics, as they call it. And, it's an investment that favors very broad-based investment in people and places and forgotten cities, as Janet Yellen calls it, versus this trickle-down tax breaks for the wealthy. So hopefully, yeah, I mean, there are, and I think there are a lot of carrots in the IRA. So hopefully we are starting to, embrace that kind of thinking about this.
Can I jump in with 2 quick comments?
Sure.
And both of those were excellent points. I just want to say on your comment, Yangbo, I think there's this concept of additionality we have to be really careful of. I don't know if anyone saw the John Oliver from a couple of weeks ago where he hammered offsets. There's a lot of good stuff in there that I think we all need to be wary of when we're thinking about co-benefits of carbon. I really want to find ways of channeling, some of these $1 trillion net zero commitments to being more than just the cheapest carbon that you can find. And I think there's great opportunities to get outcomes tied to, gender improvement and many, and there's methodologies being approved on this. So I'm not saying it's all smoke and mirrors, but we need to be serious about additionality here. And I don't want to see the John Oliver version of this a year from now. And just on Taj's point, I couldn't agree more on framing this. Some folks may have seen that the Democratic Republic of Congo announced a couple of weeks ago that they were going to basically allow oil and gas drilling in the Virunga National Park and some of the peatlands where there's billions of tons of carbon locked away. And I don't think we could, to me, that is the ultimate resounding failure of the climate agenda to motivate low and middle income countries to participate and be a part of this. So we need to translate climate investment into jobs and into workforce development and into the language of local people, and not gigatons and megatons. Anyway, thanks.
Floor is open.
I'm happy
if you have comments.
I'm happy to come in as well.
Yeah,
Great.
actually, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So just building on Jonathan's point around additionality, I think there are credible market instruments being built or designed, which are now being tested. One of them, I think Janet is here in the audience as well. There's something called WOCAN, or W plus gender credits, that they have put together, which is to measure the co-benefits on the gender impact, which we're trying to see if that can be combined with carbon and towards a transactable sort of credit as well, which has very clear additionality. Then there's something called DREC, or decentralized REC, in the REC market that we have been backing, which is trying to look at again those high impact co-benefits, which could draw in the scope 2 and scope 3 budgets that a lot of corporates have, who have made direct climate pledges, and they have set ambitious goals, and that's followed by action. It's not just pledges they are making. All of that is going towards procuring credits, which are different from carbon, by the way. REC is different from carbon, towards procuring from plain vanilla offshore wind kind of projects, and we are trying to see if we can channelize some of that to high impact projects in emerging market wherever the corporate has a footprint. So it's these are credible market instruments that are being created just to create more proof of additionality, proof of traceability and trackability, which can go a long way if there's market adoption.
Terrific. I think maybe it's 15 minutes past, so that's about when we usually cut this off. Unless anybody wants to send us off with a last thought. I think what I will do is give you the link again to the landing page for the climate finance tracker and encourage you to play around and sign up there. I think Zulema sent a link for feedback and suggestions for future improvements. So we're always looking for that. And I want to really thank all of our guests and then in particular Eric for working with us over these many months to pull this off, and we're very excited about that, as I think we found other folks are as well. So with that, we'll close up our first Agents of Impact call of the season. We'll see you back here in 2 weeks if you are interested in creative capital for gender lens investing. I think I might have messed up the title exactly, but something like that. And our colleague Jessica Pothering's in South Africa right now talking to gender lens investors and entrepreneurs. And we've got a great program coming up in 2 weeks, September 28th. So thank you very much and have a great rest of your day or night, as the case may be.
Thanks, David.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, all.
Thanks.